Hello everyone and welcome to our review of the 2017 Canadian Grand Prix here on Motorcast. Now today I'm joined by Motorcast regulars Matty and Beni. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
And I'm joined by a very special guest today, F1 veteran, F1 expert, your boy, whatever you want to call him. It's Tom Fenton.
Yes, hello, how's it going, guys? It's an honour, a privilege to be on this podcast.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Very much.
Let's get straight into it then. The Canadian Grand Prix. Incredibly, Mercedes' first 1-2 of the season. That's pretty outstanding, really, that we're saying that. It's taken them this long to get it, especially considering the kind of past 3 seasons. Of course, a really, really good win for Hamilton. Would you say that kind of qualifying lap was probably one of the best of his career? And then kind of, the race was fairly easy for him because kind of his rivals were kind of taken out of the equation, but he looked pretty dominant either way. Matty, would you say this is kind of one of Hamilton's best weekends, certainly of the season and maybe even of his career?
Well, he had a pretty much nigh on perfect qualifying, and I think that kind of set the tone a little bit. Like you said, he did have a little bit of luck with his rivals running into trouble, but he did look a bit of a league of his own, during the race at least, and he did manage to get fastest lap as well. So it's a pretty dominant victory from Hamilton, and his closest judging point, I guess you could say, is Bottas, and he was quite a ways off there. But I think it's a little bit deserved after what happened in Monaco. Obviously, he had to do a little bit of a fight back there, and to come back here to what is it's his happiest hunting ground, Canada, and top it off with a good win in pretty dominating fashion will do wonders for his confidence.
Valtteri Bottas, of course, as you mentioned, finished second, and of course he's now 7 races into his Mercedes venture. Tom, how have you kind of rated his performance? Of course, he won in Russia, he's got another podium here in Canada. Has he kind of exceeded your expectations or kind of matched it?
The thing with Bottas is that he's joining a very difficult situation. Obviously, Hamilton didn't win last season, whether that was fair or not. But, Bottas, he's had enough time in the Williams. It was time for him to step up or just remain in a mid-tier team. So I think he's done well. I mean, he's been pretty much there every weekend, apart from this weekend with Hamilton, as far as I can remember. Race pace was pretty poor compared to Hamilton. He was off. He couldn't catch him. Usually, we saw Rosberg, if he was second and Hamilton was first, he'd be able to close the gap. Bottas was not able to, but Bottas is in that second driver position, very much like Kimi Räikkönen. As much as Mercedes haven't confirmed it, we all know that Hamilton is the first driver. So I think he's done well for himself. It's the first season in the team. Stabilise his position, get to know people, and next season he's got to push. Otherwise, he won't be there much longer.
And Beni, Monaco is pretty woeful for Mercedes, but this is now a 1-2 in Canada. Just how important was this recovery from both Mercedes and, of course, Hamilton, who had a pretty nightmarish Monaco Grand Prix?
Well, I don't think it was that important in terms of their own confidence, as I think we all know the Mercedes are a great team, and Monaco was, I think, in my opinion, it was just an off weekend. And it just showcased their weak points, the chassis weak points. As you know, Toto Wolff after the race or during the weekend labeled the chassis as a diva, and I think that showed in Monaco especially. But Montreal was this time around was definitely a circuit that seemed to suit them a little better than Ferrari, and they used it to their advantage, and they got a 1-2, and even if they didn't get a good result here, if their pace would have been good, I think it would have been a good weekend for Mercedes in terms of confidence.
And of course, I think a very, very crucial race in the championship. I think this is one we might look back on kind of later on in the year. I think a very, very good recovery from Vettel, of course. Very unfortunate on the opening lap. Fell pretty much to last place, worked his way back up into 4th. Which I thought was a pretty decent drive from Vettel. I think he was voted driver of the day as well, so clearly the fans agreeing there. And of course, I think really good damage limitation. To only lose 13 points to Hamilton was a very, very good effort, especially kind of how it looked after those first few laps when he had that wing damage. So Beni, would you say overall a good recovery from Ferrari and Vettel? but maybe not quite so on the other side of the garage. Raikkonen having quite a few issues. Of course, he almost binned it into the wall, had braking issues as well right at the end of the race. So maybe a bit of a sloppy weekend from Ferrari, but maybe, it could have been even worse, really.
Well, in the end, it was just one of those weekends for Ferrari. Just a weekend where everything just doesn't add up. Seb, he had great pace, and after his turn one incident where he lost a part of the wing, he just showed why he is a 4-time world champion. He was just amazing. He had great pace. He was overtaking cars, which not a lot of people were able to do, and it was really everything. He did everything right after the first turn collision, and on the other side of the garage, it's a bit. I guess it's just been one of those weekends. Kimi just made a mistake early on in the race when he nearly hit the wall, and apparently that damaged his the underside of his car a bit. So that slowed his progress down a bit probably. But it just was one of those off weekends for Kimi, and the braking issue at the end of the race just compounded his misery. So just one of those weekends, I guess.
And Vettel, of course, I think just about 6/10 off the podium, and of course that podium was occupied by Daniel Ricciardo, his third consecutive third place finish. Pretty impressive stuff really from Red Bull considering where they were at the start of the weekend, and really Ricciardo as well kind of outshone by Verstappen, but it's Ricciardo getting the result again, through no fault of Verstappen's own. Of course, a failure for Max Verstappen while he was running in second early on. Matty, what could have been really for Max Verstappen had he not had that issue? Do you think he could have possibly even held on to second, or do you think Bottas might have got that position in the end?
There's certainly the possibility that he could have gotten second place. It seemed at the start that Bottas, either as a result of dirty air or perhaps just not having the outright pace to catch him, was unable to get close enough. But it is really unfortunate because I think we could have seen a really good race for second place with Verstappen in the mix, and it would have perhaps even dropped Bottas back enough so that he was in the clutches of Ricciardo, and you could have had a really, a fantastic battle from second down to seventh with the Force Indias, and that really would have, I think that would have brought a lot more. Perhaps the drivers would have been fighting a bit more there with a lot more to possibly win.
And Tom, what did you make of kind of Red Bull and Ferrari's weekend?
Well, firstly, I've got to say that is arguably one of the best recovery drives I've ever seen from Sebastian Vettel, especially considering how, for most people, it was a one-stop race. So he had to stop twice. Yep, Ferrari have got arguably the fastest car, but definitely the second fastest car of the race weekend. And to come back, and it was not just the fact that he had the pace, but to extend the tyre life beyond what most people were doing, taking pace into consideration, and also, that move down on one of the Force Indias into turn one, the guts and the bravery. And I do think, when we go to Abu Dhabi, which I believe is the final race, we are going to be looking back at that weekend, and that could be the difference between, Vettel or Hamilton winning. In terms of Red Bull, I think they were probably the fourth fastest car this weekend. Looking at, Force India, they looked faster. Obviously a lot of that's to do with the Mercedes engine. But they did what they could do. Obviously, Verstappen was unlucky, but Ricciardo, maybe he wasn't as fast as Verstappen this weekend, but he maximised what was available. And to come away on such a power hungry circuit with a podium is very good.
And of course, you kind of alluded to that kind of Force India battle, and we've got to talk about that. For me, probably
very juicy.
Yeah, probably the biggest talking point, I'd say, of this weekend. Obviously, like you said, simply fantastic from Vettel, very decisive, getting past Ocon. That was a really, really impressive move, and like you said, will definitely be remembered at the end of the season. But yeah, let's talk about that Force India duo, of course, of Ocon and Perez kind of refusing to let Ocon through. Put yourself in his shoes, Matty. What would you do?
Well, I'm nowhere near the personality of Sergio Perez. But I think it was fair for once Ocon caught up for Perez to have a bit of a go at him. But obviously by that point he had a good 20 laps to have a go. I think he the argument is that he should have let Ocon by immediately because his tyres were, miles fresher. But I think Perez has gotten a bit of a hard time. I can understand why first of all he didn't let him pass, but also why people are a bit upset that he didn't let Ocon pass. So I can kind of see both sides of the story, and I do think if he had let Ocon pass, Ocon would have. Well, it's debatable whether he would have gotten past Ricciardo, but he definitely would have made a better go at it, and I do think he probably would have gotten past him. But it's that racing driver's instinct. It's difficult for a driver to let his teammate past and kind of accept it. But I think it's not particularly too much to Perez's discredit. He was just fighting for what he believed. But in this case, I think he was wrong to not let Ocon past.
I think the problem was it was Esteban Ocon as well, like the most innocent driver on the grid, probably the kind of most kind of, I feel like if he'd have let Ocon through and said, if you can't pass Ricciardo, let me through on the last lap, I think Ocon would have done it, to be honest, because he seems like such a kind of mature and kind of humble guy, but would be willing to do that. He was probably going to be willing to play the team game. Of course, Perez maybe not. I guess Perez is in a bit of a position of power at the moment because, we've probably got guys like Renault, maybe Williams, Ferrari kind of sniffing around Perez for next year. So maybe he's kind of using that position of power at Force India at the moment, saying basically, if you get him away, if you try and kind of condemn what I'm doing, then I'll just leave and take my money and of course extreme talent elsewhere. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting one there at Force India. Benny, what did you make of that?
Well, it's kind of hard to put myself in the same position as they were in, but I think it was quite a bit selfish by Perez in the end, just to sometimes it's a real show of character. Sometimes drivers put the team in front. If they can do it, if their teammate can, then they let them through. But some are like big characters like Perez, and I think we all know who else is. Max Verstappen. They are the big characters that that are probably considered quite great racing drivers, or will be considered great racing drivers. But in my opinion, I think Perez should have let Ocon through. Ocon visibly looked quite a lot quicker, and with his newer tires, I think he would have had the chance to overtake Ricciardo, and with the Mercedes engine, if he could have kept it close just before the DRS zone, I think he would have got them. But that also, I think that cost both Force India as a position, with Vettel in the end catching up and overtaking them both, which I think if Ocon would have overtaken Perez, he would have probably passed Ricciardo and he would have been in front. But as it is, just a show of character, I guess.
I mean, Tom, either way you look at it, it was a fantastic drive from Ocon, and really he's been so impressive over these last few races, and looking more and more like a real star of the future at just 20 years old.
I mean, Ocon is somebody who I'd never heard of before he stepped into the Manor, and I believe it was a Manor anyway, and he's just slowly, quietly, behind the scenes, just been carrying on consistent performance. And when we were considering who Force India would replace Hülkenberg, or use to replace Hülkenberg, and it was sort of a little bit of a shock that they didn't choose Wehrlein, considering how Mercedes really have been hyping about this guy. But it's clear, he's consistent. He's really one of these guys who it's almost like a quiet Alonso. Like, Alonso always gets himself into these incredible positions in these really poor cars, and you can see a bit of this with Ocon. I think it's a shame that he didn't get a chance, and I agree with what you guys said. I think Perez should have given him the opportunity. And just a quick mention, you've got to think about the top teams. That's what Perez is looking at, and they look for somebody like Bottas who plays the team game. Now, Perez didn't play the team game today, I think, or yesterday. They, basically lost, I believe, a podium, but at least one position. I don't think Sebastian would have overtook both of them. And yeah, I just think that when you look for qualities of drivers, Perez is one of these guys who obviously is going to do what he wants to do, and that's just a bit of a warning sign to the top team. Sometimes you've got to play second fiddle to your teammate, and Schumacher used to do it, and it's something that I think Perez will look back on and probably think, maybe I should have done differently.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I think someone like Verstappen could probably afford to do that because he's got that kind of
amazing talent. Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's like Schumacher, right? Schumacher, Verstappen, Senna, they could all do that. But someone like Perez, with all due respect, I think he's looking at the second Ferrari seat, not the first Ferrari seat.
Exactly.
So yeah, like you said, I think possibly kind of hindered his chances a little bit. We'll have to see how it goes. I mean, I don't think one race is going to decide it, but certainly
I agree. We're going to look, in a week's time, most people forget about it. It's just when you've got people like Sainz who've clearly got raw talent, even though, he's made a few mistakes, he's clearly somebody Ferrari are going to consider. And then you've got this Perez guy who, we know he had a bad season at McLaren, partly the car, partly, maybe he just wasn't ready for it. But it's just, are Ferrari going to go for somebody who's a bit more selfish when they need the points? I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I mean, there's so many options really for Ferrari next year. And heck, they'll probably just keep Raikkonen, so, we'll have to see. But if not for 2018, then of course 2019, those guys will be looking at maybe that Renault seat. Well, that Renault seat will definitely go. I don't think Palmer's going to be keeping that one. So maybe that second Renault seat, for Perez, we'll have to see. He nearly joined them, I think, the last 2 seasons in a row now. So maybe he'll finally go there. And of course, that'll be interesting with Hülkenberg there. And let's talk about Renault now. It's a decent segue, I'd say, for Nico Hülkenberg, of course, in 8th. And Lance Stroll in 9th, of course. First points for Lance Stroll in Formula 1. That was definitely probably one of the biggest stories in the midfield. Stroll made a lot of overtakes. He was very cautious, which I think was good. I think he had to be really. I mean, no one wanted to see him in a silly incident, and he kept out of trouble. Came home in 9th place. That Williams, of course, is more than capable of scoring points. But to be fair, kind of compared to what the job he's done so far this year, it was a really, really good drive from Stroll. Matty?
I agree with you that it's obviously it's a brilliant result for the guy, and really kind of overdue, I think, because that car can achieve much more than what he was doing in it. But I think one of the main things that's been troubling him so far is just lack of confidence, and you could see bits of that during the race. Obviously, like you were saying, he was overtaking people with a lot of caution, and I'll admit I was watching. When I was watching the race, I was screaming at him to just keep his foot in it, because he could have gotten past quite a few drivers a lot quicker if he had just had a little bit more confidence. But confidence isn't something you have straight away, especially for young Lance here. So I think this is going to do him the world of good, and maybe we might see him a little bit of a rejuvenated Lance in the coming up races. But it's a mega result for the young lad.
Yeah, I've got to agree, especially considering I don't think he's ever raced around this track as well, so very, very impressive. It'd be really cool to see him at Baku as well and see how he copes there, and a few of these other kind of next rounds as well, more kind of traditional rounds, which of course he's raced at, kind of tracks like Silverstone in Hungary I think would be good for him. Obviously as well, Stoffel Van Dorn, kind of one of the other rookies, did not have such a good race, unfortunately. I think he was kind of in the top 10 early on, but quickly fell down. Really, really not a good race for Van Dorn, and really not a great start to the season, Benny. What have you made of Stroll in this race, and kind of Van Dorn as well?
Well, Stroll finally got the result. I think that in a few races I already thought why, he was just too aggressive and just lost the car and just didn't look at home in the car at the start of the season. But he's been improving. He doesn't look exactly at home in the car yet, but he's just shown a lot of improvement ever since his first finish, which was I think in Russia. And I think he obviously was a good talent. You can't just dominate a series from nothing and like he did in Formula 3 last season. But I think what's hurting him is mostly just lack of experience. He's only 18, to the same age as I am, and he might have been driving the cars for all his life, but not everyone's has got so much talent as Max Verstappen. But as most of formerly Formula One drivers used to get their debuts at like 20, and just I think for him it's just a lack of experience. As for Stoffel, the other rookie, he did one race last season, but I think it's also a lack of experience and the fact that these year's cars are quite a lot harder to drive. Just as I think can be seen throughout the field. It's just a hard car to drive, and add to that, Honda struggling quite a lot. That's just what you get. A hard car to drive with a bad engine. Just needs a lot of improvement from both Stoffel and Honda.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of work to do there. McLaren and Tom, just a quick word on Stroll, and then you could talk about your beloved McLaren. And unfortunately, I'd be interested to hear your take, because I think I remember talking about this venture when it started with you at the start of 2015.
Don't you dare say something that is going to make me look like an idiot.
No, I'm not going to say it. But we were talking then, and basically I'll just say there's a lot of optimism about what this venture could be, and about how these problems would be solved eventually. And when we said eventually, we meant summer break, end of year, and that of course that was in 2015. And unfortunately now, these problems, they're almost back to square one, really. I mean, what have you made of all this kind of this mess that is McLaren Honda at the moment?
It's been very painful, I must admit. Just starting with Stroll before I go on the rant. Stroll, seriously, I've been somebody who's just wanted for him to get his lucky break. Like you guys have said, he can't dominate a series without having some talent there, and he was too aggressive early on in the races. I remember watching free practice in Australia. He was trying to manhandle the cars ridiculous. It's like, you're not going to get around the circuit like that, not in a clean way, and not towards the end of the race. You are going to crash eventually. So clearly he's, over the last few races, taken a little bit more care when he's turning in. You can see he's much smoother, and I agree, he could have got past a lot of drivers much more quickly, and you do want him to just be a little bit more, go for it, whatever. But in some ways I admire that he's thinking a bit more behind the wheel. He's thinking, right, that isn't a good place to be, I'll wait, I'll try a safer route. And the confidence is going to build. He'll hopefully become a little bit more aggressive in the sense of keeping his foot down. But it's great, for his home crowd, and hopefully that means that, for the rest of the season he's going to start catching up to Massa, who's done a great job. In terms of McLaren Honda, I remember saying at the start, or before 2015, that they would be winning, and I was wrong, obviously. The problem is clear that Honda want to follow their own philosophy, and they don't really like getting help from other people. They've had a lot of these experts come in who are European or American, and they don't listen to them. Clearly, otherwise they would be much higher up the grid. I think the time has come just to... I think it's pretty clear that McLaren won't be having Honda engines next season, especially after the race where Alonso, the second to last lap, the engine just completely fails. It wasn't fuel, it just stopped. There's so many problems with it, and they were just getting mugged down the straight. It was embarrassing to watch. It really was. You knew that they didn't even, the cars behind them didn't even need DRS. They could just go past them easily. So it must be frustrating for Alonso. I think if they can get a deal signed with Mercedes before September, which Alonso's saying, when he's going to make a decision, then I think he will stay. Because where else is he going to go? I don't think Renault's going to be an option next year in terms of winning championships. Mercedes won't have him, and maybe Ferrari could, but I don't see it. Van Dorn. I've been very disappointed. This kid, everybody's been saying, is going to be a future world champion, and he's not been there. I get it, the car, it's not good, and he's against arguably the best driver on the grid, but he's not even close. Do you know what I mean? He's not even close. Qualifying is very poor. Race pace, I think Alonso actually overtook him at the start or after the safety car restart, and he's just not really been there. Hopefully he will stay another season. He deserves it. In terms of his not legacy, but everybody gave him a lot of hype before he came to F1, so I think he deserves it, because obviously McLaren have struggled. So we'll see what happens next year, but you know, if McLaren aren't careful, they really are going to start losing. I mean, they've lost a lot of money. They're going to potentially lose a great driver, even if they do sign the Mercedes contract. But it's just been a very disappointing few seasons, especially this season, where you can tell the chassis is great. It may not be the best, but it is very good. So, yeah, it's not great.
No, and I mean, in terms of an improvement either, I wouldn't, I don't think there's much optimism about Honda getting better. It's more, I think, them getting a deal with Mercedes, possibly for next year.
Exactly.
Have to see how that goes, and hopefully they'll give Van Dorn a bit more time than they gave Perez or Magnussen when they were struggling.
I agree.
We all know how that ended, and I think, like you said, they can't ditch him after a year. I was someone that hyped Van Dorn up a lot before the start of the season. I was even saying that he was going to beat Alonso on quite a few occasions.
I think a lot of people thought that could happen. He's clearly got the talent. He was, in Bahrain last year. He arguably outclassed Button, on his first race. So it's clear, but something's happened, whether it is the car but he's just not there.
In qualifying or the race, like you mentioned.
Exactly.
Really. There's not even really flashes of it, really. And when he's been in those points-paying positions, he's kind of binned it, which is, not very Van Dorn-esque from what we saw in GP2 in his time in GP2. It's such a polar opposite of what we saw in his junior single-seater career. And it's pretty tragic, really. But, there is still time for Van Dorn, especially, I think, if Alonso leaves, then obviously I think Van Dorn's is pretty safe in that team, but possibly... hopefully they're not going to kind of scapegoat Van Dorn and just kind of put their problems, a bit onto him. I mean, they're already kind of doing that with Honda, I guess. So they're probably two parties that are going to suffer. Honda, like you said, probably won't be around next season, but hopefully Van Dorn will. Matty, what have you made of all this and the situation?
I think looking back on it, they can obviously. I think it's time to get rid of the Honda deal because it's just a venture that has clearly not worked. But I think it was a risk that was definitely worth taking. The ideology for McLaren is to go out and win championships, and in their opinion, and I think in everyone else's opinion, there needed to be a factory team or a nigh-on factory team to achieve that goal. Honda have come in and they've been ambitious, they've tried, but in the end they've had. Well, I think. They went down a route for 2015 and 2016. Apparently, they got all the power they could out of their engine build, and hence this year have gone back to another development year and going down a different route, I believe similar to Mercedes. But you then get to the thought that, if you're trying to build an engine like Mercedes, why don't you go for a Mercedes and get points immediately? It's just a very difficult situation. I don't think... I mean, Ferrari have proved that you can equal Mercedes engine, or at least get very, very close. But I don't think there is a better engine than Mercedes, and I'm not sure if any engineer in any engine department is able to get even more power than Mercedes. So I think McLaren possibly need to reevaluate what they want to achieve in F1. And whether in the short term or, in the medium to long term, let's say 5 years, whether they can possibly even win a race, never mind go for a World Championship or a Constructors' Championship.
Yeah, and I just don't know who that's going to be with, because, like you mentioned, if you have a Mercedes engine, can you beat them at their own game? Are Mercedes just kind of... always going to be that one step ahead because they're the customer team. It's a bit of a lose-lose situation really for McLaren. I mean, what can they really do? They stick with Honda and they probably lose Alonso. They switch to Mercedes and they're probably still not going to win championships. But maybe that is a safe bet to at least not be in this embarrassing situation and get to the end of races and probably in the top 5. But we'll talk about it for another day. There's going to be a lot of talk really about McLaren Honda over these next few months. I mean, the engine deals have kind of been confirmed for next year, but we all know they can be broken, and I think that they probably will be willing to break the bank if it meant they'd have to run Honda engines next year. And what could that mean for Sauber as well next year? Could that mean a kind of closer link up between Sauber and Honda? Maybe that would work well. Maybe that's how Honda should have come into Formula One. Maybe they should have come back with Sauber, built it up a bit, and then maybe McLaren could have taken the engines on once they're a bit more developed. Who knows? There'll certainly be a lot of diagnosis and a lot of kind of picking over what went wrong. but unfortunately things are still going wrong, so we'll have to see how that one goes. I mentioned Sauber, of course. They seem pretty far off the pace. They got those points in Spain, but unfortunately this upgrade just hasn't really worked for them. Since then, it doesn't seem to kind of work at these type of tracks at Monaco, Canada. And of course you've got Haas as well. They were 10th and 12th. A decent race for Haas, but of course Magnussen got that penalty for overtaking the virtual safety car. And also talking of penalties, Danny Kvyat as well got 2 penalties. Not quite sure what was going on there. Kind of got a penalty for serving the incorrect penalty. I'm not quite sure, Benny. What did you make of all that kind of penalty farce with Fiat getting 2 and Magnussen getting 1 as well?
Well, with Kvyat, it was a really weird situation. Obviously, after I don't know what even happened with the grid. He just didn't go. But it was obvious that he was gonna get a penalty because he couldn't get up to his position for the safety car line. But he got the penalty, and he served it, and then he got a penalty because the first penalty was not severe enough. Apparently, that was just a derp moment from the stewards. Just giving him the wrong penalty. I think he wasn't exactly having the best of days as is, and that just made it even worse, which is kind of bad for Daniil. But and for Magnussen, obviously he overtook under the virtual safety car, so there's nothing really to say against that penalty. But that's it for that.
And Tom, Roman Grosjean came 10th, of course. He had wing damage, actually, of course, from the first lap, from that massive collision with Sainz, and of course, who then speared into Massa. And Grosjean pretty much ran the whole race on one set of tyres, got to 10th place. So I think a decent job from him, would you say? And of course, a word on that massive collision as well with Massa and Sainz. Great to see that they're both okay. Of course, Sainz being given a 3-place grid penalty. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think starting off with Haas, So he literally did the entire race from, what was it, lap 1 or 2? Is that when he pitted?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
Okay. So he finished in the points, that's good. Obviously...
Well, Jolyon Palmer was catching him at the end, so that tells you he was on warm tyres.
Wow. If Palmer is catching you, something has gone wrong to your race, obviously. But yeah, so to finish in the points, even with Alonso's issues, and I assume other people, maybe like Sainz, It's good. I think Haas just have established, last season it was a real hooray, look, there's a new team, and they clearly got on the right foot, a lot of thanks to Ferrari with the parts and all that. But this season, I think the reality's kicked in that they are just a mid-tier team, and they really have to fight with the likes of Renault, who are working their ways up, and, the other midfield teams like Force India, etc., are, ahead of them. Magnussen, I feel it was a bit unfair considering he gave the place back, but he did break the rules, so I guess, a penalty is fair. But in terms of the incident at turn 1, or the Sainz incident, yeah, I think with Sainz, he has this... I think he's arguably one of the best drivers on the grid already. I have a lot of respect for the way that he drives and his mindset. But obviously he was expecting Grosjean to yield a little bit when you saw that overhead, the bird's eye view. There was enough room for Grosjean to move a bit further to the right, but he didn't, which is fair enough, I guess. And Sainz just obviously clipped the wheel, and the rest is history. So I think Sainz needs to be a little bit careful. These clumsy mistakes, like in Bahrain as well, a little bit, ego maybe, I don't know, but it's not going to do him well if potentially Ferrari are looking at him.
And he's got 7 penalty points, I think, now. So
yeah, that's dangerous. So he could be arguably the first driver ever to be banned from a race if you get 12, is it, in a season?
Yeah, it would be the first, of course.
Wow.
It's Grosjean, who ironically labelled Sainz's incident as very similar to Spa 2012 in his opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Slightly different, I think, but
yes,
fair enough.
I think a little unfair there. That was 2 cars, and obviously the Spa one was quite a few more and a bit more dangerous. But
exactly.
Matty, what did you make of that kind of Haas? Renault, of course, we haven't really mentioned too much so far. Hulkenberg getting a pretty solid 8th place.
I think with the Renault, it's difficult to tell whether Hulkenberg is really outperforming that car or whether or whether he's really given the car credit, and you've got Palmer who's really underperforming with it, and I kind of suspect it's the latter with a hint of the first. Obviously, the whole season he's been picking up. Well, the first few races he did have a bit of trouble, but the pace was evident. And in the last few races he's been doing really kind of consistent runs into the points, and is really kind of making the name for himself again that perhaps a few people would have written off for him. And with being at Renault as well in the long term, that's a very smart move, because I think they're starting to look as if they're picking up their act finally. But with Palmer, it's a story of almost what if now, because I think they were right to give him a second chance this season, but at the moment he's just not proven it. And with talks of Kubica being testing an old Renault car, it's kind of it is starting to creep up into silly season. His job is surely at risk now, and unless he starts really sizably picking up the points, he's going to be out of a job possibly before even the end of the year.
Yeah, I think Palmer's very up against it. I mean, it can't be a good feeling for him, really, with the kind of media against him, possibly even his own team against him, with kind of possibly looking at other options, like you mentioned. Possibly a mid-season swap. I mean, it's tough in this kind of age of Formula 1 with such limited testing. It's not like it used to be where people could kind of hop in and be right on it. It will be difficult, especially if it's someone like, Sirotkin. And of course, I think Kubica is a bit too early for him. I think he'll have to do quite a few more tests before he's ready, or if he is ever ready. Of course, we're not quite sure what kind of his pace was during the test, and Sirotkin pretty inexperienced, and we've seen what's gone on with the rookies so far. So yeah, definitely an interesting one, I think, with Palmer. Benny, I just want two things from you: your driver of the day, and then any Baku prediction you want. It can be the winner, it could just be something really, really random. It's up to you.
Well, driver of the day, I think I'm gonna have to go with Seb. Obviously, that the comeback that's just a champion's drive. Just one of those days that when everything goes wrong at the start, he just made basically everything up in the race, basically as much as he could have done, and that's why I think he deserves the driver of the day. And Baku predictions are tough, especially after last year's boring race. I think it's gonna be a good day for Ferrari in the end. I think I'm gonna give you my podium prediction.
Oh, very good.
I think it's gonna be a win for Seb. Last year he just drove very well, and I think that this year with the improved Ferrari, I think that if they keep out of trouble at the first corner, they're gonna win, or they're gonna be second. So, and then second, I think in the end it's gonna be Bottas. I think last year Hamilton just didn't seem to adapt to the circuit perfectly. He just, in qualifying, I think he actually made a few mistakes.
Yeah, he crashed, of course, in qualifying, and then race he had some kind of issue.
Yeah, he had some issues,
kind of mechanical issue. He was getting pretty frustrated.
So I think that in Bottas, he had a pretty uneventful race. So I think that this year is going to be Bottas in second and Kimi in third.
Yeah, very, very good. Tom, your driver of the day and Baku prediction?
I completely agree with Benny with the driver of the day. It's a champion's drive. It's, like we said, it's going to be something we look back on potentially when the title's, a few points in it, or, that drive could have won him the championship. And, that's all that needs to be said. So, Sebastian Vettel is my driver of the day. In terms of Baku, I'm going to make a couple of predictions. So, the first is that a Force India will be on the second row of the grid. And we will have... Right, I know McLaren have got a lot of engine penalties coming their way. But
is this an Alonso podium prediction?
No, far from it. Maybe if, they start off 5 laps early, who knows, but no. I predict that a McLaren will start at the back of the... No, not start at the back. They will qualify on the back row, and then obviously, I think they both will start at the back of the grid because of the penalties, right? So, yeah, they're my predictions.
Yeah, I think every 2 races they're going to get penalties now because of the I can't remember which component, but it only lasts 2 races, which is not great. Matty, do you think that we could see a bit of retribution for Hamilton after last year, or do you agree with Benny that Ferrari might come on strong here?
Well, first off, I just want to disagree with Benny and Tom for driver of the day for Canada, and I'm gonna propose Esteban Ocon. Simply, it was a disappointing race, I think, towards the end, because I think it's a story of what could have been, but he did a masterful race, or at least his first stint was brilliant, managing to take the Ultrasoft so far into the race and putting him into play was fantastic. And then the maturity afterwards, he's put in a difficult position. His teammate really didn't help him out, and to almost take that on the chin is really shows a lot of character for him, and I think is almost the champion's drive, but in a different way. And for Baku, I don't think we're going to see Mercedes. For Mercedes, I think we're going to see a similar situation as to Monaco, where the longer wheelbase is perhaps going to hamper them, and we're going to see Ferrari on pole, perhaps with a 1-2. But I do agree with Tom that we are going to see a force in the opening of the top, and I do believe one of them is going to finish on the podium.
Yes.
Ooh.
Do you guys think we're going to get a better race than last year?
Yeah.
Yes. Obvious. I mean, if we don't, I will just turn off the TV straight away.
Well, compared to last year's standards, it's hard to be it's hard to be worse. So.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, I'm going to go with Ocon, just so we got a bit of a tie for our driver of the day. We'll give it to Vettel and Ocon, both of them. Great drives. Also great drives from Hamilton and Stroll as well. I think Hülkenberg did a great job as well. So yeah, I think good driving really all round here in Canada. We saw some fantastic comeback from Vettel, some really good overtakes. Another really good race this season, I think, is definitely really delivering. Of course, as we mentioned, next round will be in Baku. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Tom, and hopefully see you again on the show soon. And of course, thank you as well to our regulars Matty and Beni as well.